Yeah, I think AI. No, I totally don't use ChatGPT. No, no, very bad. Make your code do the work rather than you coding every single day. Make your code work on its own.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Verisian Community Podcast. It's my pleasure to introduce someone that I've known for almost a year now, Mansi, uh, to speak about a topic that is really important to us, which is good programming practice. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Mansi last year while she was still at Pfizer. Currently, she's working as a statistical programmer at the Massachusetts General Hospital, working on a really interesting project, which is the so-called Recover project, which effectively studies the long-term effects of tens of thousands of COVID patients. Is that right, Mansi?
Yeah, so we're comparing symptoms that people are showing even after they are testing negative for COVID compared to people who have not gotten COVID at all. So we can figure out if there is any need for treatment or any other symptoms that we're expecting on a long term basis. It's a NIH funded pivotal studies.
And I think you guys just published a paper recently, which I think has a few hundred citations already.
Yeah, it's I think almost 100, and I think it has over 200,000 views. That was the first paper that we did for the adult cohort. Our lead biostatistician is on it, and we're pretty proud of it. It's in JAMA, and it came out last May.
Awesome.
Yeah, but I've been with MGH since almost 2 years now. I did also do the summer internship at Pfizer last year because I wanted to experience what it was to work in a pharmaceutical company. And since I was already having a full time job, I just decided to do an internship for the experience.
Okay, great. So, one of the topics, this is the second podcast where we're covering good programming practices in clinical programming. And it's a topic that is very important to us. We're trying to build product and building innovation in this space. And we've had some really interesting conversations. And I know you've got a lot to say on the topic. So I'm really glad that we can discuss that and way to the bottom of some of these important topics. If we start very generally, how would you define good programming practice in clinical programming?
As a definition, again, I wouldn't be someone who's like extremely experienced to say, but for me, I think good clinical programming requires good functionality. It should be ensuring that every component of that particular code is working independently, but also has shareability. That let's say that I am sharing my code with someone, then they should know how to work around it, how to utilize it, how to modify it. It should have the possibility of extension and should not be that hard to maintain or understand. So I know this is a very vague definition, but for me, I think if I am reading someone's code, for me, it should not be that difficult to understand or work through it, and it should explain the process that it's doing, and it should be functional, if that
Is
makes
that
sense.
something you would call sort of almost self-documenting code?
Yeah, I think sort of like the code should tell a story of its own. The code should explain itself, and it should be able to present what the author has put on the efforts on.
How do you see the different generations in with statistical programmers? Do the, let's say, the older, more experienced generation, do you have an opinion on how an experience, how do they look at good clinical code versus, let's say, the more newer generation that's, I don't know, familiar with open source stacks and R perhaps?
The person who has been coding for some time has had a lot of experience working with someone else's code. So let's say that I'm working with some people who have been coding since the last 10 years. So they focus on shareability, as I said, that if you're coding, make sure that you're putting enough comments or you're putting enough notes there or you are making section readers so you can create an index. I have developed that habit after like coding for 3 years, that I always have headings and create sections, and I always in R at least there's like a index that you can make so you can browse through different sections of the code. Let's say it's hundreds of lines, so you don't need to see like I want to look at this particular function, it shows up there. The other thing that people who have been coding for a long time have now gotten used to is making functions or macros in SAS or functions in R, which is that if I am using a particular code, let's say to create this particular data set, and if someone needs to recreate it, they don't need to use the entire code. They can just apply that custom function on that particular data set so it can be, let's say, cleaned in a certain way or modified in a certain way. So that is something that people who have been coding for a long time, especially in the same team, have learned that whenever you think that this code can be used further, explain the function and make a function so someone doesn't have to recode it. Which people like me, when I was very initially coding during my initial years, I was just getting the job done. Like, okay, I have to make this report, I have to submit this database, this is my deliverable, I'm going to code it. And I didn't think that maybe my code can be useful to someone else as well. So they make sure that their code is important, and if it's important enough, then they can make sure that the other person who's approaching that code after that can also use the functionality of it and doesn't have to write the same thing again and save a lot of time.
And what's because you're talking here really about maintainability, readability. uh, you mentioned some really useful things, but if you're a junior programmer, what are the first things you should think about? I mean, you of course mentioned that you should think about others reading your code, but what does that mean in practice? Are there any more sort of tips that you would advise people to follow?
I was blessed to have really good colleagues that have taught me a lot of things that I didn't know. Honestly, when I joined my position at MGH, I was not that like used to R. I was pretty much used to SAS, but I have colleagues who have helped me through a lot of things. And as soon as I got on board, I started creating my own cheat sheet. So that is something I would recommend whoever is joining a new team, that whenever you see a similar patterns of code, like let's say that someone is using a new custom function or some particular packages that in our team we use dplyr or tidier a lot. So make a note of that, create that pattern, and when you see that pattern you can learn from it, that okay, I think this code was used in that particular script, because we have hundreds of script, we have tens of thousands of lines of code. So you have to understand the system of how your team works, because every team is going to be different. So the first 2 or 3 months that you've joined a team, it's going to be miserable for you. You're not going to understand anything. You don't know how everyone is used to coding. So I would say, if you don't already have a system established in your organization that they walk you through everything, take down notes, make your own cheat sheets of common functions that they're using and try to learn them. Make sure to understand the way they're coding. Like some people have, as I said, a habit of indexing, sectionalizing, commenting. So make sure that you understand that pattern and follow the same pattern so that you're gelling in with the team. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I was really skeptical. I was really doubtful that if I ask someone, they might not know. Or maybe if they would think that I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like whenever you join a new team, just ask as many questions as possible. Ask during the interview process, how do you code, what do you think is the best part of coding in teams, what would you expect from me when I'm joining the team, like what level of expertise are you expecting me to do, or ask for a sample code so you can know how they are working in their teams.
In terms of other principles, so things like robustness and what are your besides sort of the idea of making sure that the code is understandable by everyone, is do you see robustness as part of that, or what are some of the other things that you would urge people to consider?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to learn for robustness. When I was working in Pfizer, I think at that point there was one thing, because right now in our team, just our team looks at our code, because it is PHI, so it's not like anyone else looks at our code. So the team that we have of like 30, 40 people, we all are sort of used to the way we work. But when I was working at Pfizer, it was like every single internship team that comes has to look at that code. So it keeps on repeating year after year after year. So in that case, when you know that it's a publicly like shared code, it's really good to follow clinical standards. There are like a lot of clinical standards out there, CDISC standards. I can share some links, but they are good standards. STDM, ADM are those standards that you can use for cleaning and analysis when your code is being shared. And it's mainly, I think, prevalent in pharmaceutical industries that people learn those standards. I took a few certificate courses for those things, because I don't think I learned that very deeply when I was doing my master's, but I did take a few certificate courses that taught me how to take a raw data from Excel or CSV file and actually convert them to the standard that CDISC has created. And there are a lot of spreadsheets and PowerPoints out there to understand those standards as well if someone doesn't want to take a course. But I think if they're planning to go into biotech or pharma, those standards can help really good, because they can help you how to make the code exactly according to the standards of the company, which is usually the clinical standards.
So going to touch on a little bit on regulatory authorities, to the extent that you've experience or within your background, what do you see in terms of the usefulness, and especially when it comes to building good code bases that actually adhere to CDISC standards like SCTM and ADAM? What's your view? What some of the regulatory authorities want to see when it comes to good code?
I would say that regulatory compliance is a meticulous process depending on what sort of organization you're working with. If you're working with PHI or like FDA data sets, it's necessary with PHI or like informed about the specific requirements of a different helps definitely in demonstrating compliance and ensures that our programming aligns with that particular regulatory landscape. And if you're trying to learn, like let's say that I am a very up and coming programmer, I would say keep learning, because these regulatory things keep changing as you go by. There are new things coming up. So I would say update your knowledge as much as you can. And once you start implementing them on your projects, it'll be easier to understand. Because initially, I didn't even know what these standards meant, but I cleaned at least like 10 or 11 databases and transform them into these different standards. So once you get used to doing that, it won't seem that difficult. But update your knowledge as much as you can, because these standards keep on like modifying.
So the interesting thing about clinical programmers is that you have to be, as how someone put it, I think in the last podcast that we did, is you can't be a specialist in different things. You have to be good at programming, you have to know biostatistics, and you have to know um, the therapeutic area maybe that you're working in. And there's so many different sort of touch points that you have to focus on, that being excellent in one part may detract from some of the other parts. What are some of the challenges that then exist of bringing different types of people to the field? Because there's a massive need for bringing good statistical programmers. That's why we see the interest into R to expand the pool of available talent. What do you think will do to the challenges of writing good clinical programming code?
The initial challenge would be different for different people in that particular team. Let's say that I am the boss, like I am the person, I'm the manager of that particular team. For me, the most important difficult task would be to make sure that the people, if they are from different backgrounds, then they understand what we're doing here. Like I'm pretty sure that my manager is, I would give him credit that he's really calm the way he is, because we all code in very, very different ways. But he made sure initially, and he has been a teacher for over like 5 years, I think. So he was a really good mentor. So for him, the challenge was to make sure that everyone is coding similarly. Again, so that code can be shared amongst themselves. The people who have been working in R since more than 10 years versus the people who have not even worked in R for 10 months have to code the same way. So for him, the initial challenge was that honestly, if this particular code is written in front of you, every other member of the team should be able to understand what that meant and should be able to extend it. Because in us, like in our team, we are all given tasks that change every single day. And as I said, there are hundreds of scripts. And I particularly would have worked like at least 30, 40 of scripts. And someone else has written that script. I am adding to that script. Someone else is going to add to that script. So for him, I think maintaining this entire script database and make sure that everyone is coding equally so that other people can use those scripts was the main challenge. As a programmer, for me, the main challenge was that initially I had to like work with really large data sets. I had to maintain the data quality. I had to make sure that if I'm getting like something done in deadline, I'm not like messing up with the quality of that particular code. Because I have to get something done tomorrow doesn't mean that I'm not going to leave comments, not going to leave notes, not going to name the particular variables that I'm using that someone else doesn't understand what that means. So for me as a programmer, I have to make sure that anyone other than me is not suffering because of what I did. Because for the manager, the main thing, he's maintaining everything, clearing everyone's doubts. If everyone is getting stuck somewhere, he's leading them on. But for me, I'm very much working on an individualistic level. I am coding my things, I am finishing my task, and after I'm done with my task, I'm not working with that script probably for the next 10 months. But when I'm leaving that script, I have to make sure that I'm not making it difficult for my manager or the programmers that I have, that they are tracking down, like, oh my God, who wrote this code? What does this even mean? They don't have to track me
Yeah,
down
yeah.
in order to understand what I did there.
And even for
Um,
yourself.
even for yourself, you forget what you coded. So even for yourself, it's very important that when you come back to that code, it's very easy to understand and read it. It's easy to share it. It's easy to extend it. The best practice that our manager has established with us is that we send out monthly reports, we send out weekly reports, and we send out quarterly reports. So the basic functionality in all of our code, most of our codes, is that it's automated. Right now, I can actually pick up that script for that particular quarterly report that we sent, and we have like different cohorts: adult, pregnancy, pediatrics. So I can pick out that script from that adult cohort, and I can run that entire script, and that, just selecting all and running that script, would produce at least 10 CSV reports for me that I can just forward it to the regulatory office that we have to forward, unless there have been changes in the past quarter that I want to implement in that code. So it is very systematic in the way that if your code has to be done over and over again, make it as automated as possible. Every single day, we have reports that are going out of yesterday's enrollment. I sent out those reports today morning before coming to this podcast. And I literally had to do nothing because our manager has set up the way that the code runs itself at 4 a.m. in the morning and emails me and other three people the reports, and we have to just take it out of the email and send it to whoever we have to send it to. So I would say that one of the most difficult but important things is to make your code do the work rather than you coding every single day. Make your code work on its own. Automate it. Like money makes money. People say that let your money make money. So it's like let your code do your work for you. Don't code in such a way that you have to keep coding again and again. Let your code do your work for you.
So touching on this, and we always try to ask this to every guest because it's such a, well, everyone's talking about it, but AI in clinical programming. I mean, briefly, what are your thoughts? Obviously, it relates to automation, but what do you see both as the biggest opportunity for generative AI specifically, and what's the biggest challenge in stat programming?
Yeah, I think AI. No, no, I totally don't use ChatGPT. No, 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 very bad. Don't use ChatGPT. Just, I'm kidding. I think it's very, very helpful, honestly. Um, One of the things that I started doing when I joined my master's was, and a really good professor at that point at BU told me that if you're going to be a coder, you need to know what to Google. That is the thing. Because you're going to get an error. And if there's no one actually telling you what that error means, you're supposed to copy that error, you're supposed to paste it, and then you're supposed to figure out why that error is occurring. Because this was very, very initially when you're like not even actually talking with anyone, you just have projects and you have to get them done when you're a student. So Stack Overflow or like all of those coding websites actually told me what particular error this is and how to solve that error. Because you can code on your own, but when you're stuck, you need to figure out why that code is not working. And if you can't figure that out on your own, you're obviously going to use internet for that because that's the most readily available and trustworthy resource that you have. So I think AI in these senses would definitely help. I have sometimes encountered some errors and I just copy that error and paste it in ChatGPT, and that tells me that this particular function might have not worked, or maybe this syntax was the issue. Because sometimes the way these functions are written, they don't actually explain the error properly. I think in this particular situation, SAS is much better than R, where SAS actually tells you that maybe this could have been the code, and it actually gives you the right code, that maybe this was your error. But R sometimes lacks a lot in that it doesn't explain the error very nicely. So AI, rather than I would say, rather than using AI to do your job for you, use AI smartly where you can take it as assistance, I would say. Like we all have a lot of AI things right now. We have Grammarly, for instance, to proofread our documents. Rather than actually sending it to someone, Grammarly is going to have an accurate thing. I use Grammarly a lot because sometimes I um, have a lot of different issues. I have always, as a child, I have learned British English, and here the English is different. You spell things differently, you enunciate things differently. So I think I had used Grammarly a lot initially. Now I'm in Boston, so I have like different kind of English that I look forward to. And initially that was very difficult because I was very much used to British English. But like we use Grammarly to proofread our documents. I think that could be really good, like an AI tool or like a tool that could proofread your code, or probably give you better ways to code, or I think help you when you're getting stuck rather than code it for you. That would be helpful. I would not recommend people to actually asking AI to code it for them, because then just give them your salary in that case. Just so I would say just use it to increase your, and to probably help you when you get stuck, and make sure that you're still learning, you're still developing. and whenever you get, for me again, I add things to my cheat sheet. Like whenever I get stuck on an error and I ask, let's say, ChatGPT that this particular error happened, and it gives me a solution, and I think
Yeah.
that if I keep making the same mistake again and again, I just take that and paste it in my cheat sheet. And that helps me a lot to make sure that I'm not making the same mistakes again. And now my memory has been triggered that way that, let's say there's a function called grepl, let's say there's a function called gsub, and I'm sort of like messing up with the syntax. I actually don't need to go to AI or internet to again figure out what was the thing I was messing up. I just go to my cheat sheet and I look for that particular function, and that usually tells me that, okay, this is probably the place where I had like a syntax issue, or I messed it up, and this is how it's supposed to actually be done. So I would say making that notes using AI definitely would be helpful. But in general, AI can be a good assistant rather than just someone who does your job for you.
The interesting thing I find also with specifically when it comes to LLMs and SAS is that there's actually very compared to Python or any other open source languages. There's not a lot of training data to train on, but they're still really accurate. ChatGPT and other LLMs when it comes to understanding SAS and understanding or producing some sort of pseudo SAS code.
Yeah, I think that is very helpful, because even right now, if you like, let's say right now I am working with a particular team and a particular database, but let's say that I was doing a project completely independently. I am taking a publicly available data set and I have to from scratch write my code. I think
Mm.
in that case AI would really really be helpful, because I don't have to merge it with anything else, work with anything else. It's just me and the AI. So ChatGPT or any AI for that matter is really good at actually producing new stuff and making it robust. It's always clean, it's always readable. So I think the good clinical practices, they have already established those things. The one thing that I've noticed, it always explains what it's doing. Like when you write this particular thing, it's gonna produce this result. So I think that that's a good thing that they have without so much background and knowledge. Like I'm happy that whoever's wrote that is able to create that robustness and understandability in that particular code that
Yeah.
ChatGPT can produce.
And any other emerging technology that is on your radar when it comes to statistical programming?
I think there's a startup that someone in this particular podcast is right now working on, which is coming up with really good, innovative solutions to good clinical programming. So, yeah, I think you might be a lot better at answering that question than
I
I might
appreciate that. That was not a leading question. I want to stress that was a genuine question,
be.
but you're very kind. But thank you. No, we're doing our best, and we hope to work with
Yeah.
people like yourself to obviously hopefully do something that can really help the industry. And I think everything you said around LLMs, where we're working hard to incorporate that into our products as well. We have a partner company actually that specializes in LLMs, so we're trying to leverage their expertise to provide ultimately an application as part in the application for statistical programmers. But it has struck us that LLMs are actually already really good, despite the relative lack of training data when it comes to SAS, especially because it's such a not an open language given compared to Python.
I think the products that you're coming up with, specifically, I am pretty much looking forward to the product where you said that it's actually going to take in your code, probably score your code, and tell you how you can make your code even more efficient for the next time you code it. I'm actually very much looking forward to that, because there are 1,000 ways that you can do something, and not to say that one way is right or one way is wrong, but if you can actually make your code more efficient or more clean or robust, it is definitely much better. That is like a human version of that again is my manager. Whenever we code something, and initially I used to do that I used to just get it done, and he has a very subtle way of being like a very positive critic, saying that this is amazing and this is a very good job, but it can also be done like this, in order to make it more efficient or more easy to share, or something like that. So I think I'm looking forward to that product to see how much my code is actually scoring, and how I can make it better. I'm actually looking forward to it.
Thank you. And I would note that I think by the time we release this podcast, our free trial will be available where people can upload their own code and get results. So please don't hold me on that, but the free trial should be up as soon as by the time we upload this podcast. Do you have any final notes for anyone that's looking to grow as an experienced programmer? As a closing remark, any final comments on how they can excel, like they can succeed in terms of being a good statistical programmer in this field?
Learning programming in your grad school or anywhere else is very, very different than actually applying in your jobs. Every single job that you do is going to seem difficult or complicated at the beginning, because there is a certain set of people who have been doing things the way they're doing, which is, again, not to say it's right or wrong, but you are an addition to that particular team. So if you join any particular team, or if you go out in the market and find a new job, make sure that you don't lose hope or don't feel discouraged when you don't understand the way things are working, because everyone's trying to establish this standard, or like robustness or shareability or university, like universal sharing in that particular code. So if anyone's aspiring to be a programmer, I would say just be ready for a lot of change, be flexible, try to learn as much as you can. No matter how much you do learn, your job is going to teach you 10 new things that you didn't know. So don't be afraid to learn. The first 6 months or the first 3 months in your job are there for you to get trained, and join the team. So be flexible. Um, you you'll grasp it when it's the right time. I used to never work in R. I basically worked in SaaS pretty much the last 2 years that I was coding. And when I joined my team for the first few months, I felt like completely an imposter syndrome. I didn't know what I was doing. I had such difficulty, but luckily I had such helpful colleagues who guided me through it. And now I like R more than I like any other coding language. So I would say that expand your horizon, make sure that you're gaining as much knowledge as possible. If you're free, try learning new coding languages. It's never going to harm you to do that. And just take it easy. There's no right or wrong way to do things. You'll get the hang of it. You're going to learn it. It's not that difficult. And whenever you can't learn it, there's a lot of resources thankfully available out. And new people are starting new things that can help you gain new resources as well. So I would just close on the fact that if you're a programmer, there are a lot of people who can understand your pain and will get through it.
That's a very positive note to end this episode. And with that, Mansi, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. I also thank all of our listeners to staying with us and listen and hearing what Mansi has to say about this topic. So with that, I again I want to extend a massive thank you to you, and hopefully we'll see each other very soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great, and hopefully, it reaches people who really need to hear this and help someone.
Awesome, Mansi. Have a very nice day, and goodbye.
Thank you. You too. Bye bye.